Thank you very much. Next presentation is by Ruth Oldenziel and Gerard Alberts. Please. Yeah. Ruth is professor at the University of Eindhoven in the history of technology. And Gerard Alberts is teaches history of technology, but originally wrote a cum laude dissertation on mathematics. And they published, which is actually launched on this conference, an amazing study, which is called Hacking Europe, which looks at what actually happened in the 80s when the American government and the American business tried to take over Europe, and how there, not only the Chaos Computer Club in Germany, but also in Athens, in Spain, in Poland, well, they will tell us, many uprisings and appropriations of this technology happened. Lots of whispering, but I think we are about to begin.
Okay. Thank you. Well, that was serious play. We're talking, Ruth and I, about freedom for European computer users during the Cold War. Following the serious play, we are making a theme of play and playfulness. Playfulness was at the heart of Hacking Europe. Our book's main focus is the playfulness of hacker culture. Thank you, Caroline, for bringing together our presentation with this historical WoW-Pango debate, their confrontation and the Chaos Computer Club. Fascination and game, we heard the word come by all the time, was central to their debate 25 years ago. Losing oneself in fascination was seen as something good, was seen as something bad. It was about playing for technology. Play emerges from this stage play here, but it also emerges from the historical sources as we sit down and do our first round of history. The freedom we're talking about in the history of technology is primarily the openness of systems and machines for users to create their own thing, their own habits, their own practices. In our case, to make the computer a proper tool for themselves, or with a sophisticated word, to appropriate it. This freedom will give you the talk in two parts. I will be talking about the hacking part of Hacking Europe and the freedom hackers created. Ruth will follow and talk about the European side of the freedom. The essays we collected in this book argue that no matter how detailed or unfinished the design of computers, users will take hold of it, will do their own thing with it. And so technology does not come as a finished thing by itself. There is space for users to create something of their own, to take part in the production of new technology. Gamers in Warsaw were chopping the games and creating something for themselves. In Athens, they were hacking software and changing the computers. While in Hamburg, they were creating chaos. In Turku, producing demos. In Amsterdam and in Zagreb, they were partying with the computers. All this gave different and new meanings to the computers, and particularly to the then, in the late 1980s, new computers, the personal computers. These computers came in, but people gave new meanings and created new technology by the way they used them, by the way they tinkered with them, and appropriated the machines, created cultures around it. No group in Europe has done this more fundamentally, I think, than the Chaos Computer Club. And you've just heard a rendering of part of the thoughts from that community. The essays collected in our book allow us to put the Wow-Pango debate in a historical perspective. Listening to Pango and his fascination for programming, we immediately see what the written historical sources see reflected, what the written historical sources offer us. In particular, Joe Weizenbaum, Tracy Kidder. Joe Weizenbaum very early on wrote a book, Computer Power in Human Reason, and he depicts the compulsive programmer, the one with his arms stretched and waiting to fire his fingers already poised to strike, the compulsive programmer, rather negatively, but clearly a depiction of this fascination. Tracy Kidder, the one who wrote The Soul of the New Machine, this well-known book, took a more sympathetic attitude to understand what he called the midnight programmer. Well, as we heard here, as we see from other sources, there's far more to this, to hacking than fascination. It was Sherry Turkle in her book, The Second Self, who gave more depth to a description of the hacker phenomenon. She was arguably the first to really conceptualize the hacker phenomenon. The hack, the holy grail of the hacker culture, signified more than a neat programming trick. It was, she wrote, a magician's gesture, a truly surprising result produced with ridiculously simple means. And that, I think, captures this spirit. You do almost nothing, type a few keys, and miracles happen. Through a great trick, these computer users showed mastery of their trade, revealing an expertise, I quote Sherry Turkle, acquired unofficially and at the expense of a big system. The hacker is a person outside the system who is never excluded by its rules. You just heard the quotes from, in the play here, the quotes from Wow Holland, trying hard to go beyond the mere joy of hacking and connect his activity to social responsibility, and more than that, to a political agenda. You may find a first start of what was later called hacktivism here. Sherry Turkle noted that in the eye of the hacker who would deliberately choose an outsider role, complexities are there to be mastered. Locks exist to be cracked, exclusion to be countered with intrusion. A crucial aspect of the hacker's ethic ethos was to leave a fingerprint of the intrusion, but do no harm. Just as hackers were loving the machine for itself, breaking in was done for the heck of it. The self-representation of hackers as outsiders, knowing things better, not being excluded, knowing things better than the experts on the inside, is somewhat of a created image. Hackers pose themselves as outsiders, but this is a self-created pose. Here we as historians put the development in perspective, and rather than historically relativizing the debate and the idea of hacktivism, we pronounce one element with more emphasis, the element of game. The element of game is abound in Sherry Turkle's description. It appears and reappears here in the stage play. It appears here in the rhetoric of both Holland and Hübner, Wow and Pango. Yet it remains explicit, and history allows us to bring that element of game out more explicitly. And of course we refer to Johan Huizinga's great work, Homo Ludens. And in fact, this aspect of playfulness has a name. It's called the ludological element in describing this history. You find it with the Greek word, in the Greek word epembazais, intruding in computers, the Yugoslav teenagers who riffed their computers. You find it in the rhetoric of the Chaos Computer Club. And Amsterdam activists would play city and play citizens, and even have a digital city mayor, Marlene Sticker. In short, play was a quintessential element to the culture of personal computing. And again, in this playing element of play, hackers were the first to create the space to play in. The same Wow Holland, 5 years after playing bank robbery, seems to reproach Pango that he is just playing. But at closer look, we read that Pango is not playing. He gives up his play and now goes for the thrill of the reality, in entering in the relation with the KGB. So Holland does not reproach him to be playing, but to betray the play according to the rules of another system. Yeah.
I think Richard should speak now, because you have like 3 minutes here.
Yeah. Okay. Extrapolating from Wow Holland's confrontation with Pango, we can say that it's not just about playing one little game, it's about the playfulness of culture, playing as such. History tells us that that is part of hacking. It belongs to hacking not only to have an incidental, playful action, but more than that, that the culture of play, the ludological element of culture, is important. That was what the hacking part of our history tells us. I will leave now to do the next.
But I need to... Yeah, okay. So, can you hear me? Yes, all right. So indeed, play is very important, but it really matters what context. And let me, we have seen the scene in 1989, which is 2 months or 3 months before the wall comes down during the Cold War, and it's really serious business. I want to give you the story that we usually hear about the internet is how IBM really missed an opportunity, didn't understand hacker culture, and of course we know this to Steve Jobs and Wozniak here, when they were still hackers, they were seeing this opportunity, and play indeed was very important in that context, and they made the computer personal. That is the story what we usually hear. It's a very US-centric story. We can also tell it this way to give you a map. We first have the ARPANET, which is just locally. Then it goes international, as it's called. It goes to London, you know, and it goes to Norway. And then suddenly we have the Usenet. And here we have lo and behold, in 1993, all of a sudden, there are all these users, right? That's usually the story that we get. But the story is much more complicated because users, as we heard earlier of one of the speakers who had a wonderful story about how important the users are, we know very little actually about that story. Let's go back to the 1980s. We are deep, deep in the Cold War. And what is really remarkable, I want to give you a sense of how IBM was looking at Europe as a market. They basically said, you know, we don't see a potential, it's small, we only are interested in professional users, we don't actually see a potential for computers. This is 1983. Okay. And here in this context, we see hackers filling this void. And what we have to remember, and anyone who has ever used a computer knows this, the frustration that the thing doesn't work. And we have had 20 years of frustration and work of users making the damn thing work. Because IBM was, even though the US was the standard, the US was the power in the world, English was the standard, we had to all look for the United States. They didn't provide us any manuals. And no, this is really serious business. So I want to decenter this US story, because what happens in 1983, we are in Yugoslavia, and here we have Yugoslav engineers who are trying to do really what is a homebrew computer, the Galaxy. And they are wanting to create a computer that is accessible and can be used by all. And this is 1983. Then I want to give you a peek view on the Greek community. You have to remember that not only was IBM not interested, didn't see in their report in 1983 no market whatsoever, and dismissed smaller countries. But in 1981, when they were creating the personal computer, they had 3 markets: the U.S., Germany, France, and Britain had the full support. That meant manuals in the local languages, people and books. The Netherlands and Belgium only got half the service, and then you had the rest of the world. And Greece was seen as part of Uganda and Zimbabwe. And so there was no support. And so here we see hoi hackers in apocalypton. So this is your, so they had to create Greek letters to make these things work. And just to see where IBM failed and where these computer magazines and small stores became really, they called themselves the SA pirates. So in other words, they provided a service where IBM failed. And this is in 1987, a soccer arena filled with computer aficionados, families coming together to win a computer. So it was very much a community event with music and so forth. So really unlike all the images we have about these lone wolves, these hackers, these guys only being behind a computer. So I want to decenter another image. Okay, so here we have the Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And here we have the Dutch computer bus of the Housewives Association in 1985. And they are as intent, I think, on learning the skills and mastering it. So we really need different stories. Now, let me go. This first period is really still very open. IBM is not really interested, and the state also really doesn't really know what to do with these hackers. They're sort of, we have Pengo and WoW, but they really don't know what to do. And then comes really, the wall comes down, and there's this this potential. And here our gracious host, Carolyn Navion, was the producer of what was a very important Galactic Hacker Party. We just saw the play. But I also want to point out in 1990, what the internet was used for at that time is to bring together the AIDS community at Cornell, in San Francisco, in Amsterdam, and to connect the AIDS wards together through the internet. So it was a totally different kind of use, a really civic use, and it was really up against the 1980s. Remember the 1980s with the right wing coming to power, like Reagan, like Thatcher, like Kohl, and so forth. On the one hand, on national politics, and locally, a very vibrant hiker alternative culture. And it is in this context that against the Reagan travel embargo against people with AIDS, that this party takes place in Amsterdam. Now, I want to give you another important part, even though Hamburg and there were other cities in Europe that were also very important in redefining the internet as a public space. But the digital city in 1994 is really important in that it visualizes the internet not as it is a place of exchanging jokes and one-on-one, but really as a public square. And this is the interface that was designed at the time, where we have cafes, we have porno shops, we have, of course, because it's Amsterdam, we have, what? City Hall. And this was in the context of local political elections. And what I think was important about Amsterdam is that a couple of things came together. On the one hand, Amsterdam, or the Netherlands, was a transatlantic gateway in terms of the technical backbone of what happened transatlantically. Secondly, we had a huge hacker culture that was on par with the British. And thirdly, there was a vibrant squatters movement that really found it very important to give power to the people. And finally, there was also very important a social democratic local government that supported it, and so everything converged in this digital city. So that is the contribution of Amsterdam, I think, to this reinvention of the internet. And then finally, I want to give you a kind of another alternative. In the 90s, the Czech community do-it-yourself. Here is the notion of appropriate technology, that everybody should have their own wireless outside the corporations, outside the states. This is very much a post-socialist wireless device that is, you can build it yourself. And here it is on a rooftop in Prague. Really amazing. It existed in the end of the 80s, and I think they're still happening, but it is that moment of where civic technology is still existent. And now we are here today, and the question, of course, is, if we think of the 80s as these parallel worlds where everything is still possible, IBM is not interested, the state really doesn't know what to do. Hackers are really articulating very power ethics and a view for the future. Then the wall comes down, and it is maturing of the market, maturing of these three different parties, the state, the market, and the hackers. And now, of course, we're here. I think we have the big state, we have big business, and the question is, are hackers capable of making a fist against these powers? And I end up here with a kind of a curious moment in the history of hacking, is the Polish parliament, who, pushed by the hackers in the street, says no to accepting ACTA at the European level. And the question really is, are our institutions today vibrant and strong enough to channel the hackers' ethics and ideas into political avenues? Thank you very much.